The crack of the gavel echoed across the town square of Desdemona, Texas, in the autumn of 1884, silencing the crowd that had gathered for the county's monthly auction. Rosalie Adams flinched at the sound, her hands instinctively cradling her swollen belly as she stood trembling on the wooden platform. 8 months pregnant, exhausted and terrified, she fought back tears as the auctioneer announced her status to the crowd not as a slave, for those days had ended with the Civil War, but as a debtor being sold into servitude to pay off her late husband's gambling debts. "What am I bid for this woman's labor contract? 6 months of service to pay off $40 in debts," the auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the square where men in dusty hats and women with disapproving faces gathered to watch. "Look at her condition, folks. You'll get a worker, and soon enough, another pair of hands when that baby comes." Rosalie kept her gaze fixed on the scuffed boards beneath her feet. Her chestnut hair hung in limp curls around her face, partially obscuring the bruise on her cheek, the final gift from her husband before a barroom brawl had left her a widow 3 weeks prior. At 22, she found herself alone in a frontier town, carrying a child and her husband's mountain of debt. $10. Someone called from the back. 15. Another voice countered. The bidding continued, each call making Rosalie's heart sink further. She knew what awaited her: a lifetime of servitude, her child born into the same fate. The late October wind cut through her thin shawl, and she wondered if the child inside her could feel her despair. $25 for 6 months' work, the auctioneer announced, looking pleased at the rising bids. From the edge of the crowd, a tall figure stepped forward. Dust clung to his denim pants, and the worn leather of his boots spoke of miles traveled across harsh terrain. His face, partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, remained unreadable as he surveyed the scene before him. "I bid my ranch." The man's deep voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. A stunned silence fell over the gathering. "What did you say, mister?" the auctioneer asked, his bushy eyebrows shooting upward in surprise. The stranger stepped closer, and the crowd parted before him. "I said I bid my ranch, the Double D north of town. 200 acres, cabin, barn, and stock, to clear her debt entirely. Not for 6 months' service to free her completely." Rosalie's head snapped up, her gaze meeting the stranger's for the first time. His eyes were the color of the Texas sky after a storm, a clear, determined blue that held her gaze steadily. That's impossible," the auctioneer sputtered. "The debt is $40. Your ranch is worth—" "I know what my ranch is worth," the cowboy interrupted, "and I'm offering it. Do you accept my bid or not?" The crowd erupted in whispers. Rosalie couldn't breathe. The baby kicked vigorously inside her, as if sensing the sudden shift in their fate. Sheriff Tucker pushed through the crowd. "Now see here, Dawson. Have you lost your mind? You can't just give away your ranch for a woman you don't even know." Dawson Daniels, for that was his name, didn't take his eyes off Rosalie. "My bid stands, Sheriff. It's my property to do with as I please." The auctioneer looked between the cowboy, the sheriff, and the town's magistrate who had emerged from his office at the commotion. "Mr. Daniels, perhaps you'd like to reconsider." "I won't." Dawson's voice remained calm but firm. "Either accept my bid or end this auction right now and admit this whole proceeding is nothing but legalized slavery." Those words hung in the air, heavy with truth that no one wanted to acknowledge. The magistrate cleared his throat uncomfortably. "The law allows for debt reconciliation through contracted labor, Mr. Daniels." "Then take my bid, my ranch for her freedom." The magistrate nodded reluctantly. "If that is your wish." "No," Rosalie found her voice at last. I cannot accept such a sacrifice. I don't know you, sir. I cannot take your home." Dawson finally approached the platform, looking up at her with those steady blue eyes. "Miss, with all due respect, you don't have much choice in the matter. Neither of us does any more." He turned to the auctioneer. Going once, the crowd held its breath. Going twice. The auctioneer looked around, bewildered by this unprecedented turn of events. "Sold," Dawson said firmly before the auctioneer could speak. "Now, if you'll just show me where to sign." An hour later, Rosalie sat in Sheriff Tucker's office, a cup of lukewarm tea in her hands that she couldn't bring herself to drink. Across from her, Dawson Daniels signed the final papers transferring ownership of his ranch to the town of Desdemona to settle Jacob Adams' debts. "I still don't understand why you would do this," she said quietly. "You've given away everything." Dawson set down the pen and looked at her. Without his hat, she could see his face clearly for the first time, weathered by sun and wind, but younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so. His dark hair was cut short, and a small scar crossed his left eyebrow. "Not everything," he replied. "Just land and buildings." He leaned forward slightly. "Miss Adams, Mrs." she corrected automatically, then shook her head. "Though I suppose it hardly matters now." "Mrs. Adams," he amended. "I couldn't stand by and watch what was happening. Some things are worth more than property. But where will you go?" "What will you do?" he shrugged. "I've been a cowboy since I was 14. I can find work. There's always ranches needing hands." Sheriff Tucker folded the papers and handed one copy to Dawson. "This is madness, son. Absolute madness." "Maybe so." Dawson tucked the paper into his shirt pocket. "Mrs. Adams, I've arranged for a room for you at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. It's paid through the month. That should give you time to figure things out." Rosalie stared at him in disbelief. "You've not only given up your ranch but paid for my lodging as well." "It seemed the right thing to do. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "Good day, Mrs. Adams, Sheriff." With a slight nod, he turned and walked out the door. Rosalie watched him go, a strange mixture of relief, gratitude, and guilt washing over her. The baby kicked again, reminding her that she wasn't truly alone. Whatever this stranger's motivations, he had given her and her unborn child a chance at freedom. Somehow, she would find a way to make that count. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house sat at the edge of Desdemona's Main Street, a 2-story white clapboard building with blue shutters and a wrap-around porch. The older woman greeted Rosalie with unexpected kindness, showing her to a small but clean room on the first floor. "Mr. Daniels was quite insistent that you have a ground floor room. What with your condition and all," Mrs. Holloway explained, bustling around the room to open a window. "Said you weren't to be climbing stairs in your state." "He seems to have thought of everything," Rosalie murmured, sinking gratefully onto the edge of the bed. Her feet ached and her back had been throbbing all day. "Dawson's always been thoughtful, even as a boy, Mrs." Holloway smoothed a wrinkle from the quilt. "His mama raised him right before the consumption took her. You've known him long, since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. This town's seen him grow from a scrawny boy to a man of principle." She sighed heavily. "What he did today, though, giving up that ranch his daddy left him, I never would have expected it." Rosalie felt the weight of the woman's words. "I tried to refuse." "Oh, I don't doubt that. But Dawson's stubborn as a mule once he makes up his mind." Mrs. Holloway moved toward the door. "There's a washroom down the hall. Supper's at 6. You rest now." After the landlady left, Rosalie finally allowed herself to weep for the husband who had left her with nothing but debts and bruises, for the child who would be born without a father, for the stranger who had sacrificed his home to save her from bondage. The tears came until she had no more to give, and then, exhausted, She slept. She woke to the sound of voices from the front porch. Darkness had fallen, and her room was illuminated only by moonlight filtering through the curtains. Moving carefully to the window, she peered out to see Dawson Daniels sitting on the porch steps, talking quietly with Mrs. Holloway. "You can't just ride off with nowhere to go, Dawson," the older woman was saying. "Stay here tonight at least. I've got my bedroll and the stars, Mrs. H. I've slept under worse. And what about tomorrow, and the day after that? I told you I'll find work, maybe head up to the Peterson place. They're always short-handed during calving season. The Petersons' ranch is 30 miles north. You planning to walk there?" Dawson's chuckle floated through the night air. "Wouldn't be the first time I've hoofed it somewhere." "You gave your horse away too?" Mrs. Holloway sounded incredulous. "No, madam. Thunder's at the livery. I just didn't have the heart to take him today. Thought I'd give him one more night of good feed before we set out." Rosalie leaned her forehead against the cool glass. The man had given up everything, his home, his livelihood, and now he was planning to sleep on the ground rather than spend money on a room. Because of her. Because of a woman he didn't even know. Without stopping to think, she threw a shawl around her shoulders and made her way to the front door. When she stepped onto the porch, both Dawson and Mrs. Holloway looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Adams," Dawson said, standing quickly, "you should be resting." "So should you, Mr. Daniels, in a proper bed." She turned to Mrs. Holloway. "Surely there's another room available." Mrs. Holloway nodded. "Of course there is." "Then I insist Mr. Daniels stay here tonight." She looked back at Dawson. "Please, it's the least I can do." He hesitated, then shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, but, Mr. Daniels, you have done me an extraordinary kindness today. Please allow me to return even this small fraction of it." Their eyes met in the dim light of the porch lantern, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the strange circumstances that had brought them together. Finally, he nodded. "One night," he conceded. "Thank you." Later, lying in bed with her hand resting on her belly, Rosalie stared at the ceiling and wondered what tomorrow would bring. For the first time in months, she felt something she had nearly forgotten: hope. Rosalie woke to the aroma of coffee and bacon. For a blissful moment, her mind remained empty of worry, but then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She dressed quickly in her one decent dress, adjusting it as best she could over her pregnant form. After splashing water on her face from the basin, she headed toward the boarding house's small dining room. Dawson Daniels sat alone at a corner table, his hat resting on an empty chair beside him. He stood immediately when he saw her. "Mrs. Adams, good morning. I trust you slept well." "Better than I expected, thank you." She hesitated, then gestured to the chair across from him. "May I join you, please?" He waited until she was seated before resuming his own seat. "Mrs. Holloway makes the best breakfast in 3 counties." As if summoned by her name, the landlady appeared with a tray. "Eat up, both of you. Growing baby needs nourishment," she said, setting a plate heaped with eggs, bacon, and biscuits in front of Rosalie. "And you, Dawson Daniels, are still too lean by half." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Rosalie found herself studying the cowboy when he wasn't looking. In the morning light, she noticed the fine lines around his eyes, laugh lines. Her mother would have called them, and the way his hands, though rough from work, handled his cutlery with unexpected grace. "Mr. Daniels, Dawson, please. Dawson." The name felt strange on her tongue. "I need to understand why you did what you did yesterday." He set down his fork and considered her question. "My father taught me that a man's duty is to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. What was happening to you wasn't right." "But your ranch is just land and buildings," he repeated his words from the previous day. I can always find more land, build more buildings. Not easily. Not in this territory with more settlers arriving every month. A small smile touched his lips. You seem to know something about ranching. I grew up on a small farm in Missouri. My father raised cattle and horses before the war. She looked down at her plate. When he didn't come home, my mother couldn't keep it going. We lost everything. Dawson nodded, understanding in his eyes. Is that how you ended up in Desdemona? Not directly. My mother remarried, a shopkeeper in St. Louis. I met Jacob there. She paused, the memories still raw. He painted such a picture of opportunity in Texas, said he was going to build us a cattle empire. But it didn't work out that way. No, the cattle empire turned out to be a half-acre plot with a leaky cabin. And Jacob. She trailed off, not wanting to speak ill of the dead, even if he had deserved it. Jacob wasn't the man he claimed to be, Dawson finished for her. She nodded, grateful for his understanding. When he died, people came out of the woodwork with claims against him. Gambling debts mostly. I had no idea. That's not your burden to carry. The law says otherwise. Dawson's jaw tightened. The law isn't always just. He took a sip of coffee. What will you do now? The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on immediate survival that she hadn't thought beyond the next day. I don't know. Fine work, I suppose, though who would hire a woman about to have a baby? You have family back east you could return to, she shook her head. My mother passed last winter, her husband. Well, he made it clear I wasn't welcome without her. Dawson seemed about to say something when Sheriff Tucker appeared at their table, his expression grim. Morning, Dawson, Mrs. Adams. He nodded to each of them. Hate to interrupt your breakfast, but there's a situation I think you should know about. What kind of situation? Dawson asked. Seems word's gotten around about what happened yesterday. Some folks aren't too happy about it. Some folks should mind their own business, Mrs. Holloway interjected, appearing with the coffee pot to refill their cups. Well, that's not the way of small towns, as you well know, Martha. The sheriff turned back to Dawson. Tom Whitaker's particularly riled up, says you made a mockery of the auction system. He's demanding the magistrate nullify the deal. Rosalie felt her blood run cold. Can he do that? Not legally, the sheriff answered. The papers are signed, but Whitaker has influence in town, and he was next in line to buy your contract. Dawson's expression darkened. Whitaker runs the saloon. He wasn't looking for a housekeeper. The implication hung in the air, making Rosalie's stomach turn. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For now, nothing. The magistrate's standing firm on the legality of the transaction. But I thought you should know that there's talk. Ugly talk. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Might be best if you both laid low for a while. After the sheriff left, Rosalie found herself trembling. I've brought nothing but trouble to you. No, Dawson's voice was firm. Men like Whitaker are the trouble, not you. He hesitated, then reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. Mrs. Adams, Rosalie, I'm leaving for the Peterson Ranch today. It's north of here, good people. I've worked for them before. I understand. You need to find work. Yes, but that's not, he took a deep breath. What I'm trying to say is maybe you should come with me. Her eyes widened. Come with you. The Petersons have a big house. Mrs. Peterson's been wanting help with the cooking and cleaning. It would be safe there, away from town and men like Whitaker, at least until your baby comes. You want me to work as a housekeeper. Only if you want to, only what you're able to do in your condition. His eyes were earnest. I just think it would be safer than staying here. Rosalie considered his words. The idea of leaving Desdemona appealed to her. She had no fond memories of the place, and now apparently enemies as well. But to go off with a man she barely knew. How would we get there? I can't ride in my condition. The Petersons' monthly supply wagon is in town. Driver's a friend of mine. He'd be leaving tomorrow morning. And you're certain these people would welcome a pregnant stranger? Mrs. Peterson has buried 3 babies of her own. She has a soft spot for mothers in need. Dawson leaned forward slightly. I'm not trying to pressure you. It's your decision. But I promised myself yesterday I'd see you safe, and I'm not sure Desdemona is safe anymore. Rosalie looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception, any shadow of the same calculating look she'd seen in Jacob's eyes when he wanted something from her. But all she found was genuine concern. I'll go, she said finally, but I insist on working for my keep. I won't be a charity case. Relief washed over his face. Fair enough. We'll leave at first light tomorrow. The journey to the Peterson ranch tested Rosalie's endurance. Though Dawson had arranged for her to ride in the supply wagon, the rutted trail made for a jarring ride that left her back aching and her spirits low. By midday, she was fighting back tears with each bump in the road. Dawson rode alongside the wagon, frequently checking on her welfare. When they stopped to rest the horses at noon, he approached with a canteen and a concerned expression. We can stop here for the day if you need to, he offered. Make camp and continue tomorrow. Rosalie shook her head stubbornly. We're already halfway there. Better to push on and reach proper shelter by nightfall. You're in pain. I'm pregnant, Mr. Daniels. Pain is part of the bargain. Despite her brave words, when they resumed their journey, Dawson instructed the wagon driver to take the smoother path, even though it added miles to their journey. By the time they crested the final hill and the Peterson ranch came into view, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the valley. There it is, Dawson said, pointing to a cluster of buildings nestled against the backdrop of rolling hills. The main house, bunkhouse, barn, and corrals. Not as big as some spreads, but solid. Rosalie had to admit it looked inviting. Smoke curled from the chimney of the main house and lamplight glowed in the windows. As they approached, a woman emerged onto the porch, shading her eyes against the setting sun. Dawson Daniels, is that you? She called out. Yes, madam, Mrs. Peterson. Hope you don't mind the surprise visit. The wagon rolled to a stop in the yard and Dawson dismounted quickly to help Rosalie down. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, and she leaned heavily on his arm as he led her toward the house. Eleanor Peterson was a tall woman with silver, streaked black hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was weathered from years in the Texas sun, but her eyes were kind as they assessed Rosalie's condition. Well now, you didn't mention you'd be bringing a wife along, Dawson, she said. Oh, we're not, Rosalie began. Mrs. Adams is a friend in need of safe haven, Dawson explained quickly. Her husband passed recently and her situation in Desdemona became complicated. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. I see. Well, any friend of Dawson's is welcome here. She stepped forward, taking Rosalie's arm from Dawson. Come inside, dear. You look dead on your feet. How far along are you? 8 months, Rosalie answered, grateful for the woman's matter-of-fact approach. Then you've no business traveling these roads. Dawson Daniels, what were you thinking? That she'd be safer here than there, he replied simply. Eleanor's expression softened. Well, you're right about that. Come along, Mrs. Adams. Let's get you settled. The inside of the Peterson home was modest but comfortable, with handmade furniture and colorful quilts adorning the walls. Eleanor led Rosalie to a small bedroom off the kitchen. This was meant to be a nursery once, she explained, a shadow crossing her face. But it will serve as your room for now. Bathrooms through that door. I'll have one of the boys bring hot water for a bath. You're very kind, Rosalie said. But I don't want to impose. Dawson mentioned you might need help with housework. Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. We'll talk about that after you've rested. For now, just focus on taking care of yourself and that baby." After Alina left, Rosalie sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past 2 days. Through the open window, she could hear Dawson speaking with a man she presumed was Mr. Peterson, explaining their situation. The baby kicked vigorously, as if registering approval of their new surroundings. "We'll be all right," she whispered, rubbing her belly. "Somehow we'll be all right." That night, after the most satisfying meal she'd had in months and the luxury of a hot bath, Rosalie lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night. From the kitchen, she could hear Alina and Dawson talking in low voices. "It's a fine thing you did, Dawson," Alina was saying, "but giving up your ranch, your father would turn in his grave." "Dad would have done the same," Dawson replied. "You know he would have. Perhaps, but what will you do now? Mr. Peterson said he could use another hand for the winter." "And after winter, what then?" There was a long pause before Dawson answered. "I haven't thought that far ahead. Haven't you?" Alina's voice held a note of skepticism. "A man doesn't give up everything for a stranger without some thought to the future. It wasn't like that, Alina. I just couldn't stand by, and I know, your sense of justice always was your defining trait, that and your stubborn streak." There was the sound of a chair scraping back. "Well, Frank says you can have your old room in the bunkhouse. We'll sort the rest out as we go." Rosalie closed her eyes, trying to make sense of the complicated feelings swirling inside her. Gratitude, certainly, but also something else, a warmth that spread through her chest whenever she thought of the quiet cowboy who had sacrificed so much for her. It was too soon to name that feeling, too dangerous to acknowledge it. Yet it was there, undeniable as the child growing within her. The days at the Peterson ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. True to her word, Rosalie insisted on helping with household chores, though Alina and Dawson both protested that she should rest. She found purpose in kneading bread, mending shirts, and helping prepare meals for the ranch hands. Her body, however, reminded her constantly of her condition. Her back ached, her ankles swelled, and the baby seemed to grow more active by the day. Dawson worked from dawn to dusk, riding out with the other hands to check fences, move cattle to winter pasture, and repair outbuildings before the worst of the weather set in. He took his meals with the other men in the bunkhouse, but often found reasons to visit the main house, a torn shirt that needed mending, a message from Mr. Peterson, an offer to bring in more firewood. Alina watched their interactions with knowing eyes, but said nothing. One evening, a week after their arrival, Rosalie sat on the front porch wrapped in a quilt, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and crimson. The temperature had dropped, but she welcomed the crisp air after the warmth of the kitchen, where she'd spent most of the day preserving the last of the garden's produce. Footsteps on the porch steps made her look up to find Dawson standing there, hat in hand. "Evening, Mrs. Adams." "Mind if I join you?" "Of course not. And please call me Rosalie. Mrs. Adams reminds me too much of a life I'd rather forget." He settled into the chair beside her. "Rosalie, then." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Mr. Peterson says there's a storm coming," Dawson finally said. "First big norther of the season. Should hit by tomorrow afternoon." Alina mentioned we might get snow. "Possible, though more likely just cold rain. Either way, it'll be good to be indoors." He glanced at her sideways. "How are you feeling?" "Enormous," she replied with a small laugh. "And impatient. Dr. Milton said early December, but I'm beginning to think this baby has other ideas." Dawson looked momentarily alarmed. "You're not saying no, not yet, just restless?" She shifted in her chair, trying to find a comfortable position. Dawson, may I ask you something personal? I reckon you've earned that right. Why haven't you ever married? A man with his own ranch, good character. Surely there must have been opportunities. The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked out at the darkening landscape, considering his answer. There was someone once, Hannah Brightwell. Her father owned the general store in Desdemona. A faint smile touched his lips. We were going to marry when I turned 21. Had it all planned out. What happened? Influenza. Swept through town in '79. Took Hannah, her parents, and my father in the span of 2 weeks. His voice was even, but Rosalie could hear the old pain underneath. After that, I was too busy trying to keep the ranch going to think about courting. I'm sorry, she said softly. I shouldn't have pried. It's not prying to want to know something about the person who appended your life. He turned to look at her directly. What about you? How did you come to marry Jacob Adams? Rosalie sighed. A combination of youth, naivety, and desperation, I suppose. After my mother died, my stepfather made it clear I was a burden. Jacob seemed exciting, different from the shop boys and clerks who usually came calling. He talked about adventure and fortune in the West. She shook her head ruefully. I was 19 and thought I knew everything. We all believe that at 19. Perhaps, but most 19-year-olds don't make decisions that lead them to a debtor's auction block. That wasn't your doing. No, but I chose the man who put me there. She rubbed her belly absently. And now this child will bear the consequences of that choice. Not if I have anything to say about it, Dawson said, his voice suddenly fierce. This baby will have a chance at a good life, Rosalie. I promise you that. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Why do you care so much? About me, about this baby. We're nothing to you. That's not true. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I can't explain it, not properly. But from the moment I saw you standing on that auction block, I knew I couldn't walk away. It wasn't just about doing what's right. It was about... He struggled for words. It was about feeling like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Rosalie felt tears prick her eyes. I don't deserve such devotion. It's not about deserving. It's about... He broke off, seemingly embarrassed by his own vehemence. Well, anyway, that's why. Before she could respond, the door opened behind them and a leaner appeared. Supper's ready, and Rosalie, you shouldn't be out in this chill. Come inside, both of you. As Dawson helped her to her feet, his hand warm and strong under her elbow, Rosalie felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby. It was dangerous, this feeling. Dangerous and foolish and probably one-sided. Yet she couldn't deny its existence any more than she could deny the child growing within her. The storm hit the following afternoon with a fury that exceeded even Mr. Peterson's predictions. The wind howled around the corners of the house, driving rain against the windows in sheets. By evening, the temperature had plummeted, and the rain turned to sleet that ticked against the glass like tiny pebbles. The ranch hands had spent the morning securing animals and equipment, and now they huddled in the bunkhouse, grateful for solid walls between them and the elements. Dawson, however, had been invited to dinner at the main house, an arrangement that a leaner had instigated with barely concealed matchmaking intentions. Frank and I were just telling Dawson how much we appreciate the extra help before winter sets in, a leaner said, as she passed a platter of roasted chicken. The timing couldn't have been better. What with Garcia's broken arm and Williams heading back east to see his dying mother. Fortunate for us all, Rosalie agreed, trying not to wince as a particularly sharp pain shot through her lower back. She'd been feeling twinges all day, but had dismissed them as normal discomfort. I was thinking, Frank Peterson said, cutting into his potato, that we might be able to work out a more permanent arrangement. The old Marshall place adjacent to our east pasture has been sitting empty since John passed last spring. His widow moved to Dallas to live with her daughter. Place isn't much, cabin needs work, and the fences are in poor shape, but the land's good. Might be something for you to consider, Dawson. Dawson looked up in surprise. Are you offering to sell me the Marshall property? More like a long-term lease with an option to buy. You'd work here, build up the place in your spare time, eventually make it your own. Frank glanced at Rosalie, then back at Dawson. Room enough for a family there. The implication hung in the air. Rosalie felt her cheeks warm and focused intently on her plate. That's generous, Dawson said carefully. I'd need to think about it. Of course. No rush. Just an idea. Frank turned the conversation to more neutral topics: the price of beef, the condition of the north pasture, the likelihood of snow before Christmas. Rosalie tried to concentrate, but another pain, stronger than before, made her grip the edge of the table. She took a deep breath, willing it to pass. Rosalie, Alina was watching her with concern. Are you all right, dear? Yes, I'm fine, just a little twinge. But even as she spoke, another pain gripped her, and this time she couldn't suppress a small gasp. Alina was at her side immediately. How long have you been having these pains? Since this morning. But they're just contractions, Alina finished for her. Frank, ride for Dr. Milton. Now, Frank was on his feet instantly. In this storm, Alina, it's 15 miles to town. Then you'd better hurry. Dawson stood as well. I'll go, my horse is faster. No, Frank said firmly. I know the way blindfolded. You stay here, Alina might need your help. Within minutes, Frank was gone, leaving Dawson pacing anxiously while Alina helped Rosalie to her room. But it's too early, Rosalie protested as another contraction seized her. The doctor said December. Babies come when they're ready, not when doctors predict, Alina replied pragmatically. Let's get you comfortable. This could be a long night. Long didn't begin to describe the hours that followed. The storm raged outside while Rosalie labored inside. Her world narrowed to the rhythm of pain and respite, pain and respite. Alina stayed by her side, her calm presence a lifeline in the sea of discomfort. Sometime around midnight, the contractions intensified, and Rosalie found herself crying out despite her determination to remain stoic. Dawson's wearing a hole in my kitchen floor, Alina remarked, wiping Rosalie's forehead with a cool cloth. That man is beside himself with worry for you. He shouldn't be, Rosalie gasped between contractions. This isn't his burden. Seems to me he's decided it is. Alina checked Rosalie's progress with practiced hands. You're almost there, dear. The baby's coming fast now. The doctor may not make it in time, but don't you worry. I've delivered half the calves on this ranch and 3 human babies besides my own. We'll manage. An hour later, as the storm began to abate and the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Rosalie's daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the quiet house. Look at her, Alina said, placing the swaddled infant in Rosalie's arms. Perfect in every way. Rosalie gazed down at the tiny red face, the wispy dark hair, the miniature fingers that curled around her own. Despite the exhaustion, despite the lingering pain, her heart swelled with a love so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. Hello, little one, she whispered. I'm your mama. A soft knock at the door was followed by Dawson's hesitant voice. Alina is everything. Is she? Come in, Dawson, Alina called. Come meet our newest ranch resident. He entered slowly, his hat clutched in his hands, his face a mixture of concern and wonder. When he saw Rosalie holding the baby, he stopped, seemingly unable to move closer. It's a girl, Alina announced unnecessarily. 7 pounds if she's an ounce and healthy as can be. A girl, Dawson echoed, his voice hoarse. May I? "Come closer," Rosalie invited. "Meet my daughter." He approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid he might somehow disturb the perfect tableau of mother and child. When he looked down at the baby's face, his expression softened in a way Rosalie had never seen before. "She's beautiful," he said simply. "Like her mother." The compliment made Rosalie's heart skip. "Thank you for everything, Dawson, for being here, for bringing us to this safe place. I wouldn't be anywhere else." His eyes met hers, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was ready to name. Eleanor, watching them with a small smile, cleared her throat. "I'll just go make some tea. You'll be needing your strength, Rosalie." She slipped from the room, leaving them alone with the newborn. "Have you chosen a name?" Dawson asked, carefully sitting on the edge of the chair beside the bed. "I've been thinking about Hannah," Rosalie said softly. "If you don't mind." Surprise and then deep emotion crossed his face. "You would name her after? After someone who was loved by a good man?" "Yes," she adjusted the baby's blanket. "Hannah Adams. It sounds right, doesn't it?" "It sounds perfect." His voice was thick with feeling. "Rosalie, I know this isn't the time, but I need to say something." "What is it?" "These past days, getting to know you, seeing your strength, your kindness, I've begun to feel," he broke off, searching for words. "What I'm trying to say is I care for you, and for Hannah, more than I thought possible in such a short time." Rosalie felt her breath catch. "Dawson, I'm not asking for anything. I know you're still grieving your husband, still adjusting to motherhood. I just wanted you to know that whatever happens, whatever you decide to do, you're not alone. Not anymore." She looked down at her daughter, then back at the man who had saved them both. "Jacob and I were married for almost 3 years, but I grieved the man I thought he was long before he died. The real Jacob, the gambling, the drinking, the—" She touched her cheek, where the bruise had finally faded. "I'm not grieving him." Understanding dawned in Dawson's eyes. "He hurt you." "Yes, and I was too ashamed, too proud to admit I'd made such a terrible mistake in marrying him." She took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say is, I care for you too, Dawson. These feelings between us, they're not one-sided." Before he could respond, the sound of horses outside announced the arrival of Dr. Milton with Frank Peterson. The moment between them was interrupted, but not lost. As Dawson stood to greet the newcomers, his fingers briefly touched hers, a promise of conversations to come. The winter that followed was the happiest of Rosalie's life. Hannah thrived, growing from a newborn to an alert, smiling infant who captivated everyone on the ranch. Eleanor became a surrogate grandmother, always ready with advice or a willing pair of arms when Rosalie needed rest. And Dawson became the center of their small universe. Though he slept in the bunkhouse with the other hands, he spent every free moment with Rosalie and Hannah. He carved a cradle from cedar wood, built a rocking chair for late-night feedings, and on Sundays, when the weather permitted, took them on gentle wagon rides to the old Marshall place that he was slowly renovating. Their courtship progressed with careful deliberation. Both had been hurt before, both were cautious, but with each passing week their bond deepened. Dawson told her stories of his childhood, of his dreams for the future. Rosalie shared her hopes for Hannah, her own buried ambitions. By February, when the first hints of spring began to soften the Texas landscape, Dawson had completed enough work on the Marshall cabin to make it habitable. One crisp morning, he invited Rosalie to ride out and see the improvements. "It's not much compared to what you deserve," he said as he showed her the freshly plastered walls, the new roof, the stone fireplace he'd rebuilt with his own hands. "But it could be a home, for all of us." Rosalie turned to him, understanding the unspoken question. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Dawson took her hands in his. "Rosalie Adams, I love you. I love Hannah as if she were my own. I want to be a husband to you, a father to her. I want to build a life with you both." He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "I know it hasn't been long. Time isn't what matters," she interrupted gently. "It's the heart behind the time. And my heart is yours, Dawson Daniels. Has been since that day in Desdemona when you gave up everything to save a woman you didn't even know." His smile could have lit the darkest night. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes." She stepped into his embrace, feeling for the first time in years that she was exactly where she belonged. They were married in the Petersons' front parlor on the first day of March, 1885. The ceremony was simple, just the Petersons, a few ranch hands, and the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. Hannah, now 3 months old, slept peacefully in Aliner's arms throughout the proceedings, unaware that her world was changing yet again. That night, after they had settled Hannah in her cradle in their new home, Dawson took Rosalie's hand and led her to the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small package from his pocket. "A wedding gift." Inside the brown paper wrapping was the deed to the Marshall property, now legally transferred to Dawson Daniels and his wife, Rosalie Daniels. "How?" she asked, stunned by the document in her hands. "I thought this was a lease arrangement with the Petersons." "It was. But I've been saving every penny I earned, and Frank gave me a good price, considering the condition of the place when I started." He wrapped an arm around her waist. "It's ours, Rosalie, free and clear. No debts, no obligations, just our own piece of Texas to build on." She looked at the small cabin behind them, the modest barn, the acres stretching out before them. It wasn't grand. It wasn't the cattle empire Jacob had promised, but it was real and it was theirs. "You've given me so much," she said softly. "A home, a name, a future for Hannah. How can I ever repay you? By being happy, that's all I want." He turned her to face him. "I never told you this, but that day at the auction, before I ever stepped forward, I saw your face. You were scared, but there was something else there too, determination, strength. I knew then that you were someone worth fighting for." Rosalie leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "We'll build something good here, together." "We already have," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We already have." 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The Daniels Ranch, christened New Beginnings by Rosalie, prospered under their joint care. What began as 50 acres expanded to 100, then 200 as neighboring properties came available, and their hard work paid off. Hannah grew from an infant to a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's chestnut curls and her adoptive father's blue eyes. She followed Dawson everywhere, eager to learn about horses and cattle, proudly declaring to anyone who would listen that she was going to be a rancher just like her papa. And in the summer of 1888, their family expanded with the birth of twins Daniel and David Daniels, whose arrival was met with equal parts joy and astonishment. 2 boys, Dawson had marveled when Dr. Milton placed the second squalling infant in his arms. "How did we get so blessed?" "The usual way," Aliner had quipped from her position as impromptu midwife. Now, in the autumn of 1889, they gathered on the front porch of their expanded home, no longer a cabin but a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a study, and a kitchen large enough for Rosalie's growing collection of cooking implements. "Mama, look," Hannah called, pointing to the approaching wagon. "Grandma and Grandpa are here." The Petersons visited every Sunday, a tradition that had continued even after Frank had semi-retired, turning over most of the ranch operations to his son, who had returned from college back east. Aliner still treated Hannah and the twins as her own grandchildren, arriving each week with freshly baked treats and small treasures she'd found or made. As Rosalie watched her family Hannah racing to greet the Petersons, the twins toddling after her on unsteady legs, Dawson stepping forward to help Frank down from the wagon, she felt a familiar swell of gratitude. 5 years ago, she had stood on an auction block, 8 months pregnant and certain her life was over. Now she stood on the porch of her own home, surrounded by love and security she had once thought impossible. "Penny for your thoughts," Dawson said, coming to stand beside her after the Petersons were settled with the children in the front parlor. "I was just thinking about Desdemona, about that day." His arm slipped around her waist. "Not a day I'm likely to forget." "Nor I," she leaned into him. "Did you ever regret it, giving up your ranch for a stranger?" "Not for one single moment." His voice was firm. "Besides, that ranch was just land. This," he gestured to their home, their children, the life they'd built together, "this is everything." Still, it was an extraordinary thing to do. Most men would have walked on by. Then most men would have missed out on the best decision of their lives. He turned her to face him. "You know, I rode through Desdemona last month when I was delivering those horses to the army post. You never mentioned that. Didn't seem important." "But I did see Tom Whitaker." Rosalie tensed slightly at the name. And nothing. His saloon's failing. Town's drying up now that the railroads bypassed it for Cisco. A small, satisfied smile crossed his face. "Seems some decisions have a way of working themselves out in the end." She reached up to touch his cheek, still marveling at the path that had brought them together. "I love you, Dawson Daniels. And I love you, Rosalie Daniels, every day more than the last." From inside came the sound of childish laughter and Aliner's exaggerated storytelling voice. Their family waited, not perfect, not without challenges, but bound by love that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances. Hand in hand, they turned to go inside, to join the warmth and light of the home they had built together. A home that had started with a desperate bid at an auction, with a cowboy who had risked everything to save a pregnant stranger. A bid that had won them both far more than either could have imagined.